Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Rising. I'm Krystal Ball.
And I'm Saagar and Jetty.
A lot going on this morning to look at. We've got some interesting results out of European parliamentary elections, president with a big international trip that we should dig into, and you're looking at an important lawsuit.
That's right. We have some interesting developments on the opioid front. So all that coming up today on Rising. Good morning, everybody. So, Krystal, there's a lot going on across the pond. What are you looking at?
I'm looking at the trend of populism abroad. We've got some new election results to dig into here for the EU, European Parliament, so their governing body there. And the relevance here is to look and see if there's any kind of a window, any sort of trends that are happening globally that may have implications here at home. There are two things that I would point to that were really interesting. First of all, there was a kind of unexpected surge for the Greens, which are, of course, focused on climate policy. In particular, the Greens were essentially the choice of young people in Western Europe, something that I would say Democrats competing in the primary here should be taking a look at. And, of course, we've had a lot of focus on the Green New Deal, but that is going to be a major conversation here in the U.S. But the other piece that was maybe not a surprise, but still quite noteworthy, was the incredible success of Nigel Farage, a very controversial right-wing politician in the UK, of his brand new Brexit party coming in first in the UK for those EU parliamentary elections. And again, the relevance I think here that we can take back home is that there was this idea when the UK voted for Brexit that this was kind of a fluke, that if they had it to do over again, they'd go in a different direction. This whole populism thing, this was just a ripple in the pond and they were going to move on from there. And I think we see from these results very clearly that Brexit was in fact not a fluke. There is a very real populist surge going around the world that we have to take note of. And of course, the implications here, right after Brexit, Donald Trump gets elected, and this was seen very much as a sort of canary in the coal mine for Trump's election. So people who think that Trump is a fluke, that this is an aberration, that we're just going to be able to move on and go back to the party of John McCain, which is kind of an illusion and a fiction anyway, I think they're living in fantasy land.
Our politics have always been semi-downstream from Europe, and I think it's good. You know, we do share so much cultural heritage, and you're exactly right. The script for Trump was written in Brexit. Yeah. It was written in 2015, the moment that the borders were opened to the Syrian refugee crisis. The world irrevocably changed, and nobody has really grappled with that. And at the same time, we also had Fukushima, which created this dramatic climate awareness in Germany, a nuclear power nation that is going offline, becoming, almost 20% of their politics, or 20% of the people. Climate change is the number one thing that they vote on. Yeah. And it's something here that in the United States we're slowly growing this slight conscious of. Yes, we have our own unique political identity, but the reason that people voted for Brexit, many of the same exact reasons that people voted for Donald Trump.
And on the climate thing, I mean, you see those echoes now. Some of the polling has climate change in the Democratic primary as the number one issue. It's not an accident that AOC, who really probably has her finger on the pulse of the new young Democratic Party more than anyone, has made Green New Deal a centerpiece. And it's also a reason why Joe Biden feels so out of touch when he says, you know, we're going to have a middle ground on climate policy. For young voters, this is the issue. And it's a weird kind of, I mean, it's a lefty issue, so it's kind of the mirror image of what's going on in the right. But the traditional centrist parties, the neoliberal parties, they continue to decline.
Yeah, I mean, the Europeans need to figure out how they're going to be able to balance this EU centrist kind of pro-business, pro-Europe party with growing consciousness amongst a bunch of young people, either on the left who say that climate change is an existential threat, or on the right who say that immigration and internationalism is an existential threat to their own national identity. For the first time, they are no longer the ruling coalition in the European Parliament, and it's a interesting step forward to see where it goes.
And maybe most significantly, and then I want to hear what you're looking at, but the Greens are almost in a position to play kingmaker here because they're almost certainly going to have to be part of whatever the governing coalition is. And so they're going to have a really big voice in the future of the EU. So pretty interesting and a surprising result there.
Yeah, absolutely.
What are you looking at?
So what I'm looking at right now is a trial in Oklahoma. The trial begins today for the Johnson & Johnson company versus the state of Oklahoma versus the Johnson Johnson & Johnson company over the opioid crisis that is currently ravaging our country. So now, somebody has to pay whenever it comes to the fact that almost a Vietnam War's worth of people are being lost per year in the United States. This is the first case of its kind. And what is happening is that Johnson & Johnson is being tried by the state of Oklahoma for its role in promoting and developing narcotics that led to the rise of the opioid addiction here in the U.S. Opiates are currently ravaging the U.S. As I said before, the CDC puts the number at the same amount of Americans that were lost in Vietnam over the entire course in just a single year. It's one of the leading causes of death amongst young people, and it's something that the president and the entire establishment here in Washington should be doing more to do so. President Trump declared a national emergency on opioids in 2017. Now, we've seen some action. We've seen the Chinese ban on fentanyl. We've seen some action against the drug cartels, but more and more opioids are flowing across the border. Heroin is at one of the cheapest prices in U.S. history, and American kids are dying. Now, more states need to follow what the state of Oklahoma is doing. It's a novel legal strategy. The way that they plan to go after Johnson & Johnson is by pursuing charges against Johnson & Johnson for violating public nuisance. So in effect, what they're saying is that the Johnson & Johnson Corporation, in cahoots with Purdue Pharmaceuticals and all these other companies, have used their position by not alerting the American people to the danger and the addictive purpose of their drugs, that they have created, in effect, a situation where the state of Oklahoma and so many other states across the nation have to spend billions, hundreds of billions of dollars on rehabilitation, on cleaning up streets, on so many of the negative externalities that come with opioid addiction. Now, I'm really, Krystal, just warmed to see somebody trying to do something. They have to pay these companies for what they have done, not alerting the American people to the danger of their drugs. And it's just so frustrating that even Purdue Pharmaceutical was able to settle with the state of Oklahoma for $278 million. That doesn't even come close to the price that needs to pay.
In the bucket. And you look at the fact, this one little pharmacy in West Virginia, in Kermit, West Virginia, which I've been to, tiny town, 300 some people in the town, and they sent in millions of pills to this one little pharmacy. And you mean to tell me these drug companies had no idea what was going on? They knew exactly what they were doing, and they were happy to do it as long as it added to their bottom line.
It's not just the bottom line. They're bilking the U.S. taxpayer. In many of the cases, it's not even the consumers of the drugs who are paying for this. It was heavily subsidized by the United States government. They're bilking it, for hundreds of billions. We will never know the cost of how much that they got from these companies. And it's not enough that the Met doesn't take the Sacklers' money anymore, right? It's not enough that they might not be welcome in public, polite society, because we all know that behind closed doors, money still talks.
That's right.
This is exactly the strategy the U.S. government should be taking against these companies who for years and years and years ravaged the United States, and now we're all having to fit the bill.
But I also have to say here that our drug policy as a country has utterly failed. We have been interdicting heroin for over 100 years. And what has it done? Nothing, as far as I can tell. Our approach, treating a drug crisis, an addiction crisis, as a criminal justice problem rather than a public health problem, has completely failed and needs to be rethought top to bottom. And then you have these drug companies that are just willing to exploit whatever they can to basically pay off people in Washington to be able to get their drugs through and to claim that they're not addictive, even though there was absolutely no evidence that Oxy and these other drugs were less addictive than you would expect an incredibly powerful opioid to be. It's just all part and parcel of a system that is completely broken.
You're right. There's no radical thinking going on behind how to tackle this problem. It's just a business as usual grind here in D.C. without any recognition of the crisis that we face.
Indeed.
Next on Rising, President Trump's second visit to Japan included pomp and sumo wrestlers.
Of course, and contradictory views on North Korea's nuclear aggression. We're going to unpack everything from the president's trip. That when Rising returns.